General Jan Afboord's first option is to head northwest towards the Pardy Valley, which leads eventually to Riemannsburg, but it's a long way. His second option is to head due north towards the town of Vustœr in the foothills of the Massif enorme, which has a good defensive position. Thirdly, he could head northeast towards Targeland, hoping for faster reinforcements from Oftburg, but it risks having the enemy army in his flank. Of course, he chose option 2, to head north to the town of Vustœr, and this is where our story begins. Let's take a closer look at Jan Afboord's position at around noon on the 18th of July 1752. As you can see, the main Borg force is crammed into march columns on the road heading north to the little town of Vustœr. On either side, he's placed reserves of heavy cavalry regiments, though they were rather battered in the Battle of Deux Farms, and behind them a weak unit of lancers. Closer to the southern entry point, on either side of the road, you can see a battalion of Guard Grenadiers and a battalion of Marines. These are both elite units. However, you'll probably notice that out on the flanks to the east and west, things are looking pretty open and vulnerable, and Jan Afboord is hoping that he's placed his cavalry in a position that will be able to counter any threat from here. Swinging round to the north, we can see the little town of Vustœr in the foothills, and the infantry and march columns on the road approaching. He has only one battery of artillery, and that's stuck between battalions of infantry on the road. He's hoping they'll be able to reach the town and fan out onto the ridge on either side of Vustœr to form a defensive position against any further Grenouissians approaching from the south. The battle opened with the Borg racing to establish defensive positions on the ridge either side of Vustœr, as well as in the little town itself, whilst the long column continued to wend its way northwards. Meanwhile, their rear guard sought to establish a defensive position facing south, the direction from which the Grenouissians were expected. However, the first attack, when it did come, was from the west, where Grenouissian light cavalry had outflanked the retreating Borg column. A regiment of chasseurs ploughed into a unit of Borg dragoons, nearly destroying them and forcing them to rout. Grenouissian light infantry then arrived from the south, peppering the defenders with a skirmishing fire. It didn't have much effect on the Borg infantry, but that, combined with the fire from a light artillery battery, managed to force one of the Borg dragoon regiments to retreat to the safety of a nearby hill. Obviously, the Borg wanted to give as good as they got, and the infantry opened fire, causing some casualties amongst the skirmishers, even forcing one unit to retire. Meanwhile, the column plodded on, with some units managing to reach the ridge, but the defeated dragoons were surrounded and lost their guidon. The jubilant Grenouissian chasseurs decided to try their luck against the Borg in the column. However, 18th century infantry are not like their conscript Napoleonic counterparts and coolly turned to face the onrushing horsemen. Whilst this was happening, the rest of the Grenouissian light cavalry were coming round to attack the column as well, whilst the Borg infantry continued their advance, coolly heading towards Vustœr. The Grenouissian chasseurs bounced off the Borg infantry, who remained unperturbed. Well, hello ladies and gentlemen, and who's that? Give him a wave, Lee. It's the wonderful Lee from Miniature Adventures. and here we are playing the game of Vustœr. There's Vustœr on the hillside over there. It's just a very quick handheld update, and I'll do another one the other way up in a minute. But anyway, here we are. The Borg advancing up the road have been interrupted. Its advances interrupt us as the Grenouissian light cavalry has ploughed through a regiment of dragoons, destroyed them, and then carried on and ploughed into the Borg infantry, who fortunately for me were made of sterner stuff. But over here at the rear, there's a firefight going on between lots of skirmishers and a couple of battalions of Borg infantry, with some cavalry coming up in support now. There was some cavalry in support on the other side, but they've been pushed back by some astonishing gunnery from the light gun that's over in the corner. Thank you, Lee, for pointing that out. Meanwhile, lots more light cavalry, Grenouissian light cavalry coming around on the flank. This is all dangerous stuff, and the Borg aren't quite sure whether they're going to be able to make it onto the hill to form a defensive line. So it's all still to play for. Very exciting stuff, and we've got a lot done in the space of a morning, so we're quite pleased about that. So thank you, and wave goodbye, Lee, for the moment, and thanks very much. We'll catch up with you again later. In the south, the Borg Guard cuirassiers advanced, sweeping away some of the Grenouissian skirmishers, whilst the Marines continued to exact revenge on the western side of the road. Having repulsed the Grenouissian chasseurs, the Östergötland regiment opened a shattering first volley which devastated the Grenouissian chasseurs and sent them fleeing pell-mell to the west. Meanwhile, the Borg continued to stabilise the position around Vustœr, with units advancing further onto the ridge and the column making more headway towards the town. Now the Lanciers de Saxe launched themselves at the Östergötland regiment, who however managed to get off their first volley before the Lancers hit and stopped them dead in their tracks. In the southwest, the Borg dragoons attempted to threaten the light artillery battery, but found themselves rather isolated and surrounded by light troops, whilst their colleagues further to the east had nothing much to fight. On the road, however, it was a different matter, with the Östergötland regiment deciding to advance towards the hill, whilst their comrades in the Västergötland sent another devastating volley into the Lanciers de Saxe that sent them reeling back in flight alongside their chasseur comrades. This enabled the Borg column to continue tramping northwards towards Vustœr, whilst further south the Borg dragoons really did find themselves in terrible trouble. The mighty Östergötland, confronted by another regiment of Grenouissian chasseurs that appeared over the top of the hill, blasted them to oblivion as well and sent them packing. The Borg dragoons, however, shredded by skirmisher fire, fled from the field. At last, as evening fell, Grenouissian heavy cavalry arrived and charged in. One regiment did really well against the Borg dragoons, but the other was destroyed by the Borg Guard cuirassiers. This was not the end of the story at Vustœr, because even though the Borg had managed to escape the Grenouissian advance guard, the main Grenouissian army was still in pursuit, determined to exact its revenge. So tune in next time to find out what happened.